As we continue to preach through the Gospel of Luke, going verse by verse, chapter by chapter, we pick right back up where we left off the story, the widow who gave her 2 mites last week at the temple. She sacrificed everything, even in her poverty. She gave it all to the temple. And Luke could have ended his gospel account there with that nice, clean, honoring story. It would have been beautiful. Jesus celebrating, honoring the widow. How nice and clean and easy way to end his gospel. And it would have fit perfectly too, as we talked about the last several chapters. Luke and Jesus was warning the rich people of his time. And then he was also elevating the role of women and children in society. And so what a better way to end his gospel account before he goes to the cross with this story. But he doesn't do that. He gives us this, which the scholars have called the Olivet Discourse. And so immediately I start thinking, why did Luke do this? Remember his purposes. Consider what he's doing. He's writing to his friend Theophilus to give him an orderly account of Jesus so that he may have certainty concerning the things that he has been taught. And when I read this, if I were Theophilus, I think I would have liked the story of the widow. It would have been compelling even. Give it all, Theophilus. Give it all to Jesus. He's worth it all. That would have been great. And then if you think about Jesus even, why is he telling his disciples this thing? He could have ignored the comments of one of his followers. Or he could have retorted the question of the comment with another question like Jesus has done throughout all of his ministry. But he doesn't. He hears this, and it seems kind of harsh or heavy or unnecessary to tell this to his followers. Why do they need to know about the destruction of the temple, the devastation coming to Jerusalem? Why? And I think I have that reaction, that initial reaction, because I've never understood this moment before. I never understood the experience that Jesus is creating here for his disciples, his followers. And let me tell you what I mean by that. There's about 1,000 different ways you could communicate information or teach someone. I think about my kids, and I have 3 small ones. And if I want to try to teach them about the bigness or the grandness of God, I could just tell them this. I could just tell them and try to wrap their minds around how big he is and how mighty he is, how he holds all things together. I could do that. Or I could say, hey, do you want to learn? Do you want to experience how big God is? I let them wonder a little bit, and I don't talk about it all day, but then we have a bigger meal that night because this is significant, this is something meaningful. Then we do bath time, and I let them stay up a little bit later, and then when the sun has set and their hair is wet and their feet are bare, I grab their hands and I take them outside, or I carry my youngest, and we just sit under the moon for a minute. We just gaze up at the stars and the crickets chirping, the breeze blowing. I just lean down and I say, do you feel that? Do you feel how big God is? He created the moon, he created the stars, and he's bigger than all of that. So I could have told them something, or I could create this moment, this experience for them to take something tangibly with them, hopefully, through their life. And if your kids are like mine, my 2-year-old will pull my hair, a mosquito will bite my 3-year-old, and my 7-year-old wonders why it smells like poop outside or something, and the moment's gone. If you have kids, you just know. But you get the picture. I could have told them something, or I could help them experience something. And so when I initially read this passage, I think Jesus is just trying to transmit information to his followers. He's just trying to tell them something, bad things are coming. This is going to get difficult. Get ready. But that's not what he's doing in this moment. He's being pastoral with his followers. He's creating this tangible experience for them that they'll remember his goodness, his love for them, his pastor's heart for them. He's loving his disciples. He's reminding them that even though it isn't going to feel like it, even though things are going to get bad, even though the world is going to physically revolt and reel, even though that's going to happen, I am coming back. I don't want to just tell you this. I want to create this experience for you to feel this. So let's set the scene. You read this account in Luke 21, you got to read it with the other accounts of the Gospels, particularly Mark 13. We know that these remarks from one of his followers happen as they're probably leaving the temple that day. They remark on the beauty of the temple. And Jesus begins to briefly answer his followers, to comment on this. But then he pauses, he stops his teaching early on, and then begins to walk them up the Mount of Olives, or as Luke calls it, Olivet. Now, the Mount of Olives it's right outside of Jerusalem, so it wouldn't have been a long walk, but it's positioned close to the temple, so he would walk them up, maybe in the cool of the evening, and he would set them down, and then they would look over the valley, and they'd see this beautiful temple that's been constructed out of gold to celebrate the bigness, the goodness, the beauty of God. And then Jesus picks up to answer his questions, and he begins to prophesy to his followers. I mean, this is a moment that he's creating for them. He's about to leave. He's concluding his ministry, so he sits them down in an intentional manner, and he begins to love them with these words. Now, to be clear, these passages are not fully clear. I mean, whoever said clarity is kindness needed to talk to Jesus, because he's not fully understanding what he's doing here. And this passage is hotly debated amongst biblical scholars, going back and forth as to everything that Jesus is doing and saying. And so I'm not going to pretend to act like I have it all figured out this morning. And frankly, I don't think Jesus is asking us to have it all figured out when he himself, back in Mark 12 or 13, says, I don't know the hour or time in which I am coming back. So why do we spend time thinking or debating about what we think is going to happen? And I think whenever we do that, whenever we contemplate over when or how or why, I think we miss the pastoral moment of Jesus. We miss the heart of Jesus. We miss the main point of him setting them down on this mountain. I don't think he's just trying to give them a secret about the end times. I don't think he's transmitting his future plans to his disciples. Now, we do know that Jesus is doing at least two things in this passage. He's simultaneously prophesying about the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem, but then he's also tying that intimately to his second coming. And so let me just give you a quick example of this as we start out. In verses 10 and 11, it says this, Then he said to them, Nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes and in various places famines and pestilences, and there will be terrors and great signs from heaven. So these two verses are smashed between a discussion around the destruction of the temple. So we know his prophecies are about that. And historically, we know these prophecies do come true from Jesus' words. That around 70 AD, whenever the temple was destroyed, we know that nation was warring against nation, that there were reports of earthquakes and famine. So spoiler alert, Jesus' words are true and remain true today. And at the same time, he's going to repeat these same things later on about his second coming. And so it's common to ask the question, like, is Jesus talking directly to his followers then, or is he talking to us now? And I think the answer is yes, both. It's both instructive for his followers then, and it's instructive for us now. So here's what I want to do. I want to walk through the passage, pull out some critical things that I think Jesus has for us, and then spend a good chunk at the end just not missing this pastoral moment, this experience that Jesus is creating for his followers up on Olivet. So verse 5, And while some were speaking of the temple, how it was adorned with noble stones and offerings. Now let's stop there. I know I didn't even get a verse in, but let's just stop there real quick. It's amazing how short the disciples or the followers of Jesus' memory is, right? So he just celebrated the widow's mite, giving effectively nothing to the temple. And then as they're leaving for the day, they're just like, this place is beautiful. I mean, look at those stones. Look at the amazing majesty, completely missing the point of Jesus' previous teaching. But that's another story for another day. So verse 6, Jesus says, As for these things that you see, the days will come when there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. And they asked him, Teacher, when will these things be? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place? And he said to them, See that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is at hand. Do not go after them. So let's stop there. I mean, we're just easing into this passage, and clearly we see Jesus is up to something. I mean, one of his followers comments on the beauty of the temple, and Jesus immediately responds with, this place will be destroyed brick by brick. I mean, like, if that's not a Jesus juke, like, I don't know, like, what is. But it's a pretty uncomfortably shocking statement, which, again, by the way, this statement comes true in 70-ish AD whenever the temple is dismantled by Roman army as they destroy it brick by brick to pillage the gold that encases all of the stones there. So Jesus' words continue to stand the test of time. And naturally, upon hearing this, his followers would have been concerned. I mean, looking to Jesus to give them some comfort or some clarity. I mean, Jesus, what's going to happen? And Jesus doesn't give them that clarity immediately. He warns them to not be led astray. Don't be led astray by the flashy Instagram story preacher or the gospel influencer wearing the "Thank You Jesus" tank top, or someone saying they have it all figured out. Don't follow them. They're not me. Don't go after them. And then he goes on in verses 9, 10, and 11 to warn them that things are going to be even more difficult. I mean, you might say it's terrifying to some extent. Wars and tumults and earthquakes and famines and pestilences. And in these moments, Jesus knows that we're going to long for comfort. We're going to long to follow someone or something. We want to be safe and secure. We want our salvation, and we want it from someone we can see, from some good preacher or influencer who makes us feel good, but at the same time just leaves us feeling wholly inadequate to live up to their standards. He says, follow me. Stay the course. Remember my words. But then underneath all of this, like, do you hear what Jesus is telling his followers? I mean, do you hear the depth of his words as they wrestle with this news? I mean, he's telling them graciously, he's telling them humbly, you're going to long for salvation, but I'm not going to be here. I have to leave you now. I know these last 3 years of my ministry, you following me has been incredible, but I have to go. Things are going to get difficult. Things are going to get scary. You're going to long for salvation, but you're not going to see me. Jesus is telling his followers, a week after the city of Jerusalem shut down in order to celebrate his arrival, a week after that, he's telling them, I'm leaving you. But we go on in verses 12 through 19. The things seemingly get worse for his followers. Not only is Jesus leaving them, but he's telling them, he's promising them persecution. Just listen to this passage. But before all this, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you, delivering you up to the synagogues and prisons. And you will be brought before kings and governors for my name's sake. This will be your opportunity to bear witness. Settle it therefore in your minds not to meditate beforehand how to answer, for I will give you a mouth and wisdom, which none of your adversaries will be able to withstand and contradict. You will be delivered up even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and some of you they will put to death. You will be hated all by my name for my name's sake, but not a hair on your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your lives. Persecution and following Jesus go hand in hand, and I think we forget that sometimes, but it's all throughout the scriptures. But importantly, here Jesus is promising that they will be persecuted, that they will be chased, they will be handed over, they will be called to account for their faith. And this isn't just going to come from the authorities or the religious leaders that they disagree with, but it's going to come from family members and coworkers and friends. And some of you, they are going to hand you over and put you to death for following Jesus. And I think this is just a sobering reminder for us as we sit here today. But in these 6 verses, we begin to see a glimmer of hope, maybe. That he's telling his followers in the first 5 or 6 that he is leaving them, but here in 12 through 19, he's promising them, I will be with you. I will give you a mouth and wisdom. He tells them not a hair on your head will perish, meaning that even though that he is leaving, he's watching over them and ruling over their ultimate salvation, that even though they may kill your body, I hold your soul for those who are in me and they cannot be taken from me. So he promises them, if they endure, if they steadfastly pursue Jesus, even though he is gone, they will gain their lives. They will have their salvation in the midst of chaos and destruction and death. Jesus is leaving. Things are going to get bad through persecution and death. but he promises his followers, I will be with you. I will guide you. Now, the next few sections, 20 through 33, I think you need to read them. It's helpful for me to read them as just one continuous section. I know it's broken up, but Jesus goes back into this mode of simultaneously prophesying about the destruction of the temple and prophesying about his second coming. So it's helpful, I think, to read it all together. And here's what I think Jesus is doing. I think he's answering his followers' question or the comments about when will the temple be destroyed and what signs should we be looking for. So I think he's answering that question. But then he's not just answering that question, he's springboarding his followers to understand that he's leaving now, but he is coming back for them. I mean, listen to how this discourse culminates in verses 27 and 28. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, when these things begin to take place, straighten up and raise your heads because your redemption is drawing near. I mean, church, he is coming back for us. He is riding in the clouds, and all the people will see him exalted. All the people will see him glorified and magnified. Listen to these other scriptures that talk about this. Matthew 24:27, for as lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Or Hebrews 9:28, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. Or Revelation 1, behold, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the tribes of the earth will wail on account of him. Even so, amen. Church, he is coming back for us. I mean, look how beautifully I think he closes his thought. I mean, he starts out with, I am leaving you now. Things are going to get difficult, but I will be with you. And church, never forget, I am coming back for you. I think people get all sorts of distracted and tripped up about trying to predict the future or understand the second coming. And we spend so much time arguing and debating what Jesus is specifically referencing here, but I just don't think it's necessary for our everyday Christian obedience. I mean, there's nothing wrong with deep biblical study and thought. I mean, we have a class going on tonight about theology and life. There's nothing wrong with that. But when that becomes an impediment to your love for Jesus, or to said another way, that when theological study replaces your love for Jesus and obedience to him and what he is commanding, I think that we have missed the point. He's moving his followers to a place of understanding that he's coming back. Yeah, but when? It doesn't matter. He's coming back. Yeah, but what's going to be happening? It doesn't matter. I'm coming back. I mean, what do I need to be looking for? It doesn't matter. Children, hear me. I'm coming back for you. And when we get caught up and ignore everything else he says, I think we get caught up on verse 32. It says, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all has taken place. But we miss verse 34. Jesus doesn't give us clarity or a timeline or a time frame. He doesn't ask his followers to figure it out. But what he does ask his followers to do is to be ready, to understand that he is coming back and to be ready for him to come back. He spends these 30 verses prepping his followers, preparing his followers to get to a point of understanding that he's leaving. Things are going to be difficult. Some of you will be killed. And then he paints this glorious picture of his return. And then he says this in verse 34. He says, but watch yourselves. Be on your guard. Take care. Give attention to. Be aware, children. Watch yourselves. Jesus culminates this pastoral moment with that phrase. He moves away from the prophecy. He moves away from the destruction. He moves away from the difficult times, and he's making it personal to his followers who are sitting right in front of him. Remember, he's up on the mountain, and I just kind of envision him just gazing at the temple, these first 30 verses, talking about its destruction. He's just gazing at this beautiful, immaculate temple. And then he gets to this and he finishes his parable and he turns to his disciples and he looks them in the eye with grace and love, filling his eyes, and he says, but children, watch yourselves. He doesn't create this moment for them to transmit information. He doesn't create this moment for them to give them some secret about his second coming. He's being pastoral. He has something more important for his followers, and I think he has something more important for us. I am coming back. You have to watch yourselves. You have to be on guard, and I think that should cause us to sober up. And I wonder how often we've kind of ignored this before. I mean, how often has Jesus said, I know things are difficult. I know there is brokenness. I know that you are hurting. I know that the world is suffering. I know there is so much to be anxious about. But hear me, child. Hear me, son or daughter. I am coming back. You have to watch yourself. Son or daughter, I know you're in pain. I know it hurts. I will walk with you. I will hold your hand. I will grieve with you and cry with you and carry you whenever it's hard. But hear me, watch yourselves. I am coming back for you. Don't misconstrue what I'm saying. Jesus is concerned for us. He weeps over the brokenness and the pain and suffering. He loves you and desires your ultimate healing and restoration. Just hear his heart in verse 23 for the suffering women and children in Jerusalem. He weeps over them. And then chapter 19, just previously, he weeps over Jerusalem. So he grieves the brokenness that plagues us, but more than just placating to us. For some reason, he's saying this world is broken, and under the sovereignty of God, things will have to come to pass, and the restoration is coming. It's not here yet, but I will right all the wrongs. I will bring justice for you. I am coming in the clouds with great power and great glory. But children, hear me. Watch yourselves. Jesus specifically tells us to watch certain things as they long for his return in verse 34. He says, but watch yourselves, lest your hearts be weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness and cares of this life, and that day come upon you suddenly like a trap. Jesus knows that living through the brokenness of this world is weighty. He knows how hard it is to see sin and pain and suffering and sickness. I mean, he lived through injustices himself. He knows what inequities and inequalities look like. He was rejected. He was wrongly accused. And in the midst of waiting for his return, he's warning us that we're going to be prone to distract ourselves or to numb ourselves or to worry ourselves to death. So some of us get tired of waiting for Jesus. I mean, we pursue entertainment or experiences or events or promotions or parties or gatherings. This is this idea of dissipation or carousing is another word for it. If Jesus isn't here yet, we might as well have some fun while we're waiting for him. So we just distract ourselves with the trivialities of life and begin to forget that he is coming back. And so whether subtly or forcefully, you throw yourselves at distraction after distraction. And here's how it happens subtly, I think. Have you ever just wondered like how you binge watch a whole season of Yellowstone over like 2 days? Or you realize that you're still at work and it's 7 p.m. and you're supposed to be at dinner at 6. Or you're at a coffee shop working from home or you're supposed to be studying and you're just sitting there scrolling, trying to find the end of the internet somehow. I mean, sometimes like the distraction, it's subtle like that, but then sometimes it's like intentional and it's big. It's, dealing with the pain and suffering of this world is just too much. So let's just be honest, going out with friends is so much more fun. So we go and we party every weekend, every day we can, every holiday. Or rather, maybe we self-soothe our souls with like the next car or the next house, or we can continue to consume at the best restaurants, or we travel to the highest mountains, or we got to be at the beaches with the best view, and because we can't be stationary and deal with the pain of this present life, we just have to go. And wherever we are in our journey, if we're not careful, we'll intentionally or unintentionally think that the answer to this world's pain is to distract ourselves from experiencing it. We get to the end of our hearts and our hearts are still heavy. No lasting satisfaction is gained, and we just keep looking for the next experience or the next promotion or the next adventure to save us from the weight of this world, to escape the monotony of sin and brokenness and pain. That if we're not careful, I think we'll distract ourselves to spiritual death. And maybe it's not distracting ourselves. I mean, many of us are prone to just seek to numb ourselves from the brokenness and devastation of this world. And we check out, we use substances like alcohol, we get drunk, or we use narcotics to blunt the pain, or maybe it's something less scandalous than drugs or alcohol. Maybe it's just like social media. Maybe we just aimlessly scroll, passing the time while we feel nothing, searching for something, our eyes not even focusing on the screens that we're looking at, looking to pass the time with an activity that makes us feel like we're engaged in the real world, but in reality, it couldn't be farther from experiencing real life. This is so much easier to do that than to graciously discipline our kids or to passionately engage with our neighbor or to have a great conversation with our spouse. We just go through the motions, disengaged from our life. Our family's quietly wondering like where we have gone, nothing exciting. We can't find joy anymore. We don't feel the range of emotions. We don't engage in the relationships around us. We step back from Jesus. We ignore his call. We don't hear him whenever he says he is coming back to right all of the wrongs. He is coming back in power and in glory. We're just numb, drunk, seeking to pass the time painlessly. And if we're not careful, I think we might numb ourselves to spiritual death. Then some of us, we swing hard the exact opposite way. I mean, instead of like checking out from this life, like we check into everything that the world has been throwing at us. I mean, the cares of this life are so overwhelming sometimes. There's just so many of them. We have our children to protect. We have our reputation that's important. We have success that we're chasing. We have the house we're building or remodeling, the relationship that's falling apart, or the relationship that we want to be in. We want to fix and change everything. Or maybe it's something like more meaningful than those things that the world is telling us you have to be passionate about, you have to pursue, like it's climate change, or it's protecting gun rights, or it's taking guns away, or it's freedom of speech, or it's fully expressing myself as the best that I can in the way that I want to. But the crazy thing, though, is, as you think about this, there's always more to worry about tomorrow. I mean, regardless of which political party is in power, regardless of what country you live in, regardless of how much money you have or you don't have, tomorrow has more worries. And the day after that has more worries. And then the week after that has even more. And the month after that has even more for us. If we just focus on the cares of this life, the world is going to dictate what we focus on. The world will set the narrative of your life. We'll move from one issue to the next, one passion to the next, one cause to the next. And in this passage, Jesus is honest about the devastation, the pain, the turmoil that the world is in. He's honest about that. He knows the situation, and it doesn't surprise him, and he's not worried about it because he's coming back in power and in glory. We step back and we try to fix everything. We begin to worry about all these things, and we get caught up in the cares of life, and we act as if Jesus is never coming back for us. And if we ignore his call, if we're not careful, we worry about ourselves. We worry until our spiritual death. If you're anything like me, I mean, I flow in and out of these things all the time, right? So I start off, I'm distracted. The next day, I'm just numb to everything. And then by Friday, I'm worried about Monday that's coming. And Jesus graciously, he lovingly, he warns us to watch ourselves, lest our hearts be weighed down and we forget that he's coming back. The startling thing is, I think if we forget that Jesus is coming back, if we forget this glorious return of him descending in the clouds in power and in might, that he's coming back to redeem his people, to restore the brokenness, if we forget that he's coming back, then his words become much more dire. If we're not watching ourselves, Jesus' words actually are quite terrifying. At the end of verse 34, he says, that day, Jesus' return will come upon you suddenly like a trap. Jesus makes it abundantly clear in 35 that day will come upon all who dwell on the face of the earth. There is no escaping his return. So Jesus, in his final few days with his followers before he goes to the cross, he lovingly interrupts them. The comment about the temple. He intentionally hears the questioning, missing the point of the widow's offering, and then he graciously walks them up to Olivet. He sets them down, gazing at the temple, and he says, I am leaving you now, but I am coming back for you. Be ready. I mean, the beautiful thing about Jesus, I think, is in these moments what he calls us to, or really what he isn't calling us to. Like, he isn't asking you to fix anything. Like, he isn't asking you to redeem anything. He isn't asking you to protect the temple. He isn't asking you to stand guard in Jerusalem. He isn't asking you to tribe up to defend your nation or your rights or to restore the brokenness of the world. He isn't asking you to do any of that. Jesus is just calling you to watch yourselves. Children, I am coming back. Watch yourselves. He isn't asking us to do those things because he's the one that is doing everything. He's the one that's leaving. He's the one that's going to the cross to protect you. He's the one that's going to the cross to redeem you. He is going to the cross so that he can come back in great power and great glory. Children, sons, daughters, you just have to be ready for his return. Can you imagine Theophilus, like reading this portion? I mean, he's reading this orderly account that Luke is writing to him to have certainty. So he reads the miracles and he hears the value and worth that he's putting on all people and the women and children, the warnings that he's given to the wealthy, the widow, she puts in her 2 mites, give everything to Jesus. It's beautiful, it's inspiring. And then he opens up this portion. And you begin to hear Luke just whispering to Theophilus. Jesus is warning us, Theophilus. We can trust him. He is good. Things are going to be hard. There will be persecution. There will be destruction. They're going to take down the temple brick by brick. But Theophilus, he's coming back. He's coming back. Will you be ready? Don't let that day come upon you like a trap. I imagine Theophilus putting the scroll away or the papyrus or closing the email, whatever it was, and just kind of pondering for a moment this passage. Now, scholars believe or tell us that Luke wrote this in the middle 60s AD. And in a few short years, around 70 AD, Theophilus will live through the words of Jesus. Jerusalem will be surrounded, Rome will invade, and then the temple will come down brick by brick by brick. Theophilus, you can trust him. Be ready, he's coming back. Just wonder about Theophilus. I just wonder about you and me. Are we ready for his glorious return? Are we ready for him to come back and right all of the wrongs?